use the phrase user-generated content.
UGC.
Should be UGC,
Yeah.
which should be something you're familiar with. And I think in a way that's easier because that we just refer to that as that's pretty much anything that a viewer, a listener, or a user of our online services wants to contribute or has to contribute to the wider coverage. User-generated content generated by the users. So it's a well-known phrase. So for a start, we probably don't use the phrase citizen journalist, but I take your point. I think we're probably talking broadly the same thing. I mean, anybody who has filmed something, has an eyewitness account, has got in touch and or has written about it themselves in a non-professional capacity. That's basically what we're talking about here. So
Because probably if you call UGC, you are detaching yourself from what the citizen journalist is. It's this content in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's the user-generated content.
It's
It's
the
not
content.
It's not a content produced by the BBC or
Yeah.
any other whatever.
Yeah,
media outlet,
exactly.
right?
So you put a slight bit of distance between
Yeah.
yourself and the content that's been gathered, partly for reasons of explaining the quality of the images. If it's a television image that people want to know if they see a image on the television that's shot on a mobile phone and it's within the context of a news report that's been shot by a professional cameraman on a £40,000 camera, then it jumps out. So partly it's to explain the quality of the image, but partly it's, of course, to source the image, to explain who gathered it and to give that kind of explanation to the people watching as to who it is. And partly as well, it's to give you a slight kind of editorial distance to say, this wasn't necessarily obtained, verified and gathered by a BBC staff reporter, correspondent, producer, whatever. Although having said that, we don't put things on air that are not verified unless there's a very, very good reason to do so. I mean, we're very careful about verifying this content. Sorry, to come back to your question. It was very important in the Clutha, the role of citizen journalists, I think, very important indeed, because we had a lot of people contacting the BBC in the first hour after the crash and in the hours following that with information, with pictures, stills, videos, comments that were incredibly useful to our coverage of the event. So the first and most obvious example would be the very first stills we had from the scene. Now, some people contacted us, some people posted them on Facebook or on Twitter, and we tried to contact those people and ask if we could use their images in terms of copyright. But overall, it was really important. And I suppose the interesting story from my point of view was, I'm out on the scene just too late, really, to have got the initial eyewitnesses. They've melted away by the time I got there, which is not ideal. I think there's a golden hour after a news story breaks of that nature where I think you need to get to the scene very, very fast and very quickly to pick up the first people, the first witnesses. And if you don't get there within that hour, you begin to rely much more on the social media aspect and the people who've contacted you to try to bring them back and try to get those interviews that you need for your reports. So I got to the scene and there weren't that many people left who'd been eyewitnesses or who had their own video or stills. So what I then did was, quite early on, I phoned the news desk in London, who were getting a lot of this information coming to them, and I said to them, it's really important here that you get to me the best people. I need to know who the best people are, who have the best stills, the best video, the best comments on what's happened. You need to provide me with that information, and then I will go and find them in Glasgow. So we're in a kind of slightly topsy-turvy world where I'm the reporter at the scene, but I'm asking someone in the office to find out who the best people are and to put me in touch with those people, and that's what we did. So on the night, the London news desk put me in touch with a really nice chap called Brendan, and Brendan had been inside the Clutha and had been very lucky to he'd not been injured and he'd managed to get out, and he very kindly contacted us with his story, but of course he'd not contacted me at the scene directly, so I then went to find him in the middle of the night, and I ended up phoning him and going to his house and doing an interview with him, and that became a very important interview in our coverage because it was the first person who had been an actual survivor of the crash, and we got that within just a few hours of the accident happening. only thanks to Brendan's actions himself in contacting a media organisation. In a sense, I suppose Brendan was a citizen journalist. You know, he had witnessed it and he had contributed. So that was important. And the other person who, this is slightly unusual, I suppose, the other person who was very much the citizen journalist on the night was Jim Murphy, the Member of Parliament. And Jim very much acted like a citizen journalist. He alerted a lot of people to the crash because when he tweeted it, I mean, other people had tweeted it, but they didn't have that many followers. And obviously, it's a great skill to be able to sort the wheat from the chaff in Twitter and to spot people who don't have very many followers tweeting significant events. But Jim Murphy did have a lot of followers, so a lot of the people who first knew about the crash were actually Westminster correspondents or political correspondents in Scotland, and they were then contacting their news desks saying, Jim Murphy's at the scene of this crash. But Jim very much acted as a citizen journalist, I would say, providing what you would call user-generated content. So they were my two concrete examples of people on the night.